Hello everyone, my name is Jared Lubert. I am a forensic sales engineer with Belkasoft, and I am here today with Mr. Tony Parn, who is the Director of Sales of Passware. So today we're going to discuss macOS forensics and some of the unique things that we can do as digital forensic examiners with uh, T2 images and how we can decrypt those with the utilization of Passware in conjunction with Belkasoft X. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into a quick portion of Belkasoft X. We will then dive into the password portion, and then following both of the presentations that we have prepared for you today, we will be answering questions at the end of this webinar. Also with us here today are two very special guests. We have Yuri, the CEO and founder of Belkasoft, and Dimitri, the founder of Passware. So you will be able to ask questions to them specifically at the end of this webinar as well. All right, let's begin. All right, so here we are in the home screen of Belkasoft Evidence Center X, and we are in our latest release version 1.15 that was actually just released last week. So a lot of really great and cool features that have been added, and again, that continued support to support your mission as digital forensic investigators and examiners. So we are now in the home screen again of Belkasoft Evidence Center X, and we want to create a case. So we'll create a case. We'll just call this one Mac Forensics. We're going to store it in our cases. I'm currently in the East Coast time zone, so we're going to leave it there. Enter my name as the examiner, and I will select Create. And from here, it's going to create a case and then ask us to add a data source. So in the background, you can kind of see what a sample case would look like inside of Belkasoft Evidence Center X. But you can see we're immediately asked to add a data source to our case. So I can either close this and wait to do it, because I can also add a data source from selecting Add Data Source from here, as well as in the top right-hand corner, this little blue circle with the document inside of it is also Add Data Source. All right, so before we can actually add a data source to Belkasoft Evidence Center X, we're going to have a data source. And so this is a really good segue to pass it off to Tony from Passware to show you how to acquire and decrypt a T2 image, where we will then load it into Belkasoft X for analysis.
So thank you on my behalf for having me here and giving me the chance to introduce one of our products. My name is Tony. I am the Director of Sales at Passware. I've been in the company for 4 years, a little bit over that. And one of the main topics actually on our behalf is the T2 add-on. Now, Passware has decrypted in many, has pioneered in many decryption techniques. And one of them is the T2 add-on. So we are the first one on the market to allow you to brute force a Mac computer that has a T2 chip on it. We support all of the Apple devices that have it and all of the MacOS versions. Now do note that you gotta have a good dictionary. It has to be good, it has to be created based on the suspect, simply because the attack speed is between 10 to 30 passwords per second. So in real world, you probably don't have the chance to run through millions and millions of passwords. So the dictionary needs to be short, and that will be the one that guarantees you the success. We have received quite a lot of positive feedback from our customers. So definitely software works, and let's see how it works. So for this actual demo, I do have to use a video, simply because I don't have as lovely fingernails as my coworker has. If I'm not working with Password, then I'm renovating my house. So, and another actually good reason is that I don't have a Mac computer with me. Now, the step number one is that you gotta get the product key. You can purchase it from Belkasoft and then go to License Manager, add the key, and then you're more or less ready. Now we have done UI changes to the to PasswordKit Forensic. So I'll later show you where exactly is that add-on. And yeah, it was used, the demo was done using a 2022 version 2. Now the step number 2 is that you gotta connect the target device to another Mac using a Thunderbolt cable. You need to restart the target Mac and press the T key until you see a FireWire icon on the screen. The Mac Mini is now in target mode. Now, step number 2 is step, or 3, yeah. So launch terminal on the second Mac and use the disk util tool to get the name of the external disk. It is disk 3 in our case. Run the dd command to start imaging the disk. And you can use MacOS or any other forensic software to acquire the encrypted disk image. It takes a little bit less than 2 hours to create a 500 gigabyte image. And you should see it on the screen right away. Yeah. Now the next step, which is the final one. So you got to set up PasswordKit Forensic to recover the password for the target Mac. Click APFS MacT2 and browse for the encrypted disk image created in the previous step. Enable the Create the Decrypted Partition Image checkbox and select the folder to save the decrypted image and the output project folder for the service files. And click Next once it's active. Select the correct model from the drop-down list, prepare the USB-C Thunderbolt cable, and connect the target Mac to the device that's running PasswordKit Forensic using the cable and put it in DFU mode. Soon the preparing the device message appears. And then click Next. Choose the account to recover the password for and click Next. And now you get to select the customized settings to set up the password recovery. Now, this is probably familiar to many PasswordKit Forensic users, but yeah, we're doing a joint attack and we know something about the password. Obviously, that might not be the case in real life, but nevertheless, yeah, you might know something about it. Now, the password recovery process starts, and once the password is recovered, PasswordKit Forensic starts creating a decrypted image. It might take several minutes to calculate the estimated time to perform the decryption, and then the decryption process starts. For the 500 gigabyte partition, it took roughly 4 hours to complete the task. And after the decryption, PasswordKit calculates the MD5 and displays the results with the password for the selected account. Now, let me show you where the T2 add-on is now in the latest version. So it's over here, the blue one over here, right? That is the one that allows you to perform the brute force attack. All right. Now, by the way, with the latest features, what we have also done is that now you can also recover, so we can now decrypt unallocated volume data that may contain deleted data. So basically, you can recover the deleted data for APFS images. Obviously, the first step is that you gotta decrypt the T2, the Mac with the T2, and then you can use PKF to decrypt unallocated data as well. Right. Now, I know don't have much time, but let me be quick. So I would also like to let you know, or kind of remind you, inform you that we have PasswordKit Mobile. It's a tool meant for extraction and decryption of locked devices, so mobile phones to be precise. And it relies on the PasswordKit Forensic technology for brute force and decryption as well. So we support over 200 phones, and the latest one that we just provided support for was, by the way, Samsung Galaxy S7, S8, Exynos-based devices. Now, in many devices, you can use GPU acceleration. As, for example, I saw a video about that Samsung. We were attacking it with a speed of 69,000 pulses per second. So if you have a pin code, 60-digit pin code, numbers only, that will be done very fast. Now, you can get PasswordKit mobile pricing, you can get T2 pricing, you can get PasswordKit forensic pricing from Belkasoft. So do ask from them. I do believe we're going to have a discount as well. But thank you on my hand. And yeah, we'll be here till the end of the webinar to ask all of your questions.
All right, thank you for that, Tony. So what we're going to do now is add the data source that was just created into Belkasoft X to add an existing image, and I'm going to select my APFS image. I'll open that up. As you can see here, it has found a 200 meg FAT32 and then an APFS container, it looks like, with 4 different volumes, as well as some unallocated space. So I'm going to go ahead and process all of those volumes. Now here, this will give us the option to individually carve specific portions of this image. Again, you have the option to do carving for all space or no carving for all of these different volumes. So we're not going to carve for the sake of this webinar, just know that that is an option. So we'll go ahead and select next. One thing I could do is I could filter for Mac and then select these artifacts and say, okay, just process for all of these Mac artifacts. Now, what I would like to do, let's go ahead and switch to a macOS profile, and what that's going to do is automatically set the artifacts specifically to Mac. Now, just so we don't miss anything, I'm going to select process for all artifacts. If I wanted to analyze carved and embedded data, I would check this little checkbox here. What this would allow me to do would be process compressed or zipped files and actually get the artifacts out of those zip files within my case. Now, again, for the sake of this webinar, I'm going to skip this and select next. It's going to ask us if we want to calculate hash values, and so we will. We'll do SHA-1 and MD5. Because as you're all aware, just doing MD5, it is prone to collisions, and so it's always good to have a secondary hash calculated for your artifacts. So I'll go ahead and select next. And then classifying pictures. This would be something you'd want to do if you didn't need your case processed immediately. Now the picture analysis is fairly quick, but I typically like to tell people if they're going to do picture classification, this can be done after you process the image. So if you're just trying to get the data imported into the case and extract the artifacts that Belkasoft supports out of the box, I'd recommend doing picture analysis after the original processing, as well as extracting keyframes from videos, because you can do that at any point in time during your investigation. So I'm going to skip this for now, select next, and we will search for encrypted files and volumes because that's kind of the point of this webinar, is to show the integration and cooperation between Passware and Belkasoft and how we can make life a little bit easier, or at least the workflow a little bit easier for examiners. So I'm going to search for those encrypted files and volumes, select next. And then what I'm going to do is say, no, I do not want to create a new profile, and I do not want to update an existing profile, so I'll say no. And from here, it's going to show you all the different types of options that you've selected. And if you're okay with everything you've selected, you'll select complete. And from here, it's going to say you can open the task tab to watch the Belkasoft process the image that you've imported. It'll tell you, what stage it's at, what percentage it's completed, what exactly it's processing for inside of the task tab. As you can see in the background, we can begin to see the image populate artifacts from carving. And so what I'm going to do is let this process, and while that's processing, we will cover some of the items that we will be talking about during this webinar, like how secure is the Apple T2 chip. We'll cover types of artifacts that we can acquire from T2 images, and what system artifacts we can extract and expect to see during a digital forensic investigation with Belkasoft. And there are a few items in here that Tony's already kind of covered on what do you need to extract a T2 image. And so he touched on that, about a good dictionary file being necessary, and then how to create that image. And so the types of things that we're covering inside of Belkasoft again are, how secure is that T2 chip, and then what can we extract and what system artifacts are going to be created and how they're important to us as digital forensic examiners. So to begin, while this is taking place, how secure is the Apple T2 chip? Just how secure is it? Well, before we jump into just how secure it is, we should talk about what it is. So it is a second generation security chip from Apple, and it's just a combination of a few hardware controllers in iOS devices or macOS devices. And so the T2 chip itself is not just there for security or to be a pain for examiners. It's actually built to do multiple things. It is to secure the device, but it also helps improve the performance of the device that it's in. So why do they call it a security chip? Well, it's responsible for the secure boot of a Mac or iOS device, and so the entire boot process is validated. And the way that this does this is the bootloader and the operating system have to be signed and approved by Apple, and only approved drives can be used to launch your operating system. So that, as you can see, would be a problem for digital forensic examiners trying to capture these types of devices, because whenever that is the case, this chip protects your system to prevent third parties from booting an unsigned operating system or attempting to access data. So if we're booting from another device to acquire this Mac, obviously with these T2 chips, that's where we're running into our issues. It's responsible for the encryption of the drive. And again, I kind of mentioned it briefly, but this used to be handled by the CPU in older devices. And so now the T2 chip does it itself and frees up some space for those CPU resources. I'm sure you're all pretty much aware now, but any MacBook or any of the like that has recently come out, they have some sort of Touch ID, like fingerprint scanners, or so on. So the T2 chip itself actually houses the secure enclave where your fingerprint data and any other sort of verification portions are actually being stored. And they're handled entirely by that T2 chips, which means that applications never even have access to the data where this fingerprint is being stored, or how your face and Touch IDs are handled on like for iPhones and iPads. So that's just some of the things that the T2 security chip does. So a little bit more on the T2 chip. So the T2 chip itself actually has a SSD controller and a crypto engine, and that allows for instant decryption and encryption of data on the SSD. So that makes use of the same technology that runs File Vault. I'm sure you're all familiar with that, but it's just an older encryption with Mac type devices. And you have to enter a password when starting it. So when you encrypt data using the T2 chip, it's impossible to decrypt it without using the correct password. It's pretty standard for some sort of encryption mechanisms. All right, so I went ahead and just put a stop to the processing because there was a bunch of nested data source that Belkasoft was able to discover inside of this Mac image, and I didn't want to continue the processing because we have what we need for this webinar, just to kind of show you, hey, this is what you can expect to see from APFS type file system. So if I were to hit this drop down arrow, you'd see a bunch of different types of nested artifacts to include some iPhone backups, some DMG images, and so on, that were all extracted and additional artifacts being pulled from these particular nested data sources. So I'm going to go ahead and close that up just so it's not as noisy. And this analyze with errors, that came from me stopping the actual processing of the image just so we can get into the webinar. Now, What I can do is go ahead and select one of these artifacts here, and it would take me directly to that inside of the artifacts tab. So if I were to do system event logs on this APFS image, it brought me to the overview tab inside of the artifact screen in Belkasoft X. Now, real quick before we dive too much further into this particular webinar, what I want to do is kind of give you an overlay or an overview of what you can expect to see inside of Belkasoft X. So we have an overview tab. What that's going to do is combine artifacts from all of our data sources here. So if I were to dig into, let's say, the system files. These system files, while they are all related to the APFS that I just loaded in to Belkasoft, they are going to be a combination of all of the data sources that were even found as nested. So if I wanted to branch out and just look at specific data sources, I would go to the structure tab. And so from here I have these iPhone, and you can see it's locked. Now what I could do is right click, enter the password, and unlock that iPhone backup as well inside of Belkasoft in order to get more artifacts from that iPhone backup. So we were able to find some encrypted files, and what I'll go ahead and do here is just kind of show you what you could do with the integration of passware and file decryption. So if you have Passware Kit Forensics, it is, by the way, an add-on module that can be purchased through Belkasoft. But what we can do is look at the, how long will it take us to actually try to brute force these encrypted files. Now a lot of them say slow brute force, and so that would actually take quite some time. Other things you would see in here would be like instant. Every once in a while, there's also these fast brute force where you could right click and you can do a brute force password, and from here there's automatically going to be a top million password list that you can try to brute force against. You can also use a key dictionary from the case. So if we were to go back here to our dashboard, we can do a create a key dictionary, and that's going to basically pull a strings or potential passwords from all of our data sources combined. And so again, Tony will talk on this a little bit, but it's really necessary to have a good dictionary file, one that's pertaining to or related to the image or the case that you're working, in order to try to decrypt these files. So going back into the artifacts tab, if I were to right click and try to brute force an encrypted file that it found, I would do that and add a key dictionary from the case. We can also say iterate over all passwords. We can specify a particular type of attack. And then we can enter in a Passware Kit Forensic configuration file. And I know they do have a much larger password list that can be used to try to brute force these files. But again, that's going to be up to you on what you want to try. But it would be beneficial to really narrow down a dictionary file related to the case that you're working. So enough about the encrypted files. Just know that that is a possibility directly from the user interface of Belkasoft Evidence Center X. And if it were to find the password, it would spit the password out here in File Open Password. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into some of the things that we can expect to see while working with APFS images inside of Belkasoft X. So very interesting. Let's just go over to overview. We'll look at some of our system event logs. We have our system files here, and we can see who the administrators are on the machine. And there's just a lot of really good information, like bash history. What was entered, what commands were entered last on the machine. So a lot of, again, really, really good information. Who was the last person to be using the machine? iOS accounts attached to the machine. Maybe see these types of account names, where the account came from, and so on. You can also see paired Bluetooth devices and photo info, recently opened folders, your Spotlight folder. A lot, interesting artifacts that you would not necessarily be able to see without having these decrypt images. So looking a little bit further into like user groups, users, we can also look at things such as geolocation data or chats. We can right click, add or remove filters, and from here do things like, hey, only show me messages that have attachments. and select apply. And so now I can see, based on these conversations, the attachments that came along with these types of messages. Now, it's an invalid picture, so that was a bad example, but understand that that is a possibility. And then over here on the right, let me go ahead and clear this filter real quick. Over here on the right, if we were to select a message, we can see all of the metadata, the general properties, where it came from, where it's stored on the system over here in the Properties tab. Now, looking back, let's go ahead and look at some different types of artifacts. So you can see here from the cellular usage DB and the consolidated DB from this device, we can get some pretty important information, such as the device info, the serial number of that particular device, phone numbers attached to it, and so on. Selecting IP settings will allow us to see the particular configurations for this device. Again, the MAC serial numbers, which we've already seen before, different types of networks that they've connected to, as well as operating system versions that have been or are currently on the machine. So again, a lot of very good information to be pulled from these APFS or MAC images in order to perform forensic investigations. So again, this is really just kind of an overview on different types of artifacts that can be discovered using Belkasoft X. Some of the things I'd also like to touch on while we're here is there's multiple different types of views. So again, the bubble chat view is really good for maybe non-technical, or maybe you're presenting to the court artifacts that you've discovered that are necessary or pertinent to your investigation, and that's in bubble chat view. You can do it from right here. Now, for examiner view, it gives us a little bit more information if we're able to switch over to grid view. These are like Excel documents, so I can auto size them. I can right click. I can choose what columns I actually want to see in here. And then just a real quick mention on the time local. Now this is gray. You can see the highlight behind it. That's because it's based on what time you presented inside of your case properties. Now, keep in mind this can change things like daylight savings time, and it may be necessary for you to actually change the time zone for different types of devices. So say you have a computer, but say David here actually a different region while using the phone than he was in the Mac. And so say he went on vacation and you were only interested in his phone during a certain period of time. So let's just say for this particular artifact, you can change the date time of where that he may have been with his iPhone and not change the local time to all your other artifacts. Now that's why that's important in there to say, hey, this time local, it's highlighted because it's dependent upon whatever you set in the case. So if again, I can change the time zone for each individual artifact so that it actually makes sense, but it's something to be cognizant of while doing an investigation. Now, I had mentioned pictures and what we can do with pictures. So instead of doing the picture analysis during the processing, one thing that we could do is right-click pictures in the overview, do analyze pictures, and then we can detect for different types of items and so on. We can also show checked items on map. If you have an offline version of Belkasoft X, you'll have to use like show on Google Earth. So download Google Earth and you can display it on a satellite imagery map and so on. So some of the things that you can expect to see inside of Belkasoft Evidence Center X while loading Mac images. So there's a lot of really good information in here. Different types of viewers real quick that we can hit on. We have pop-up full screen hex viewers where you can load in files even without a case loaded. So I could just click this little load button and browse to any file I want to load, and you can use it as an offline hex viewer as well. You can search through hex for hex or text and so on. You can bookmark items, so like say this is of interest to me, I can bookmark this item in my hex viewer just like this, and then go in here and see the two different bookmarks that I've created, and I can jump between my bookmarks and so on. Now, jumping into, let's go back into our chats just to give you an idea of what our SQLite viewer looks like built into Belkasoft. So we can open up, again, this in full screen. We've got all our tables on the left-hand side. We've also got the properties, which is very helpful. So it'll tell you how many, the page size of the SQLite databases, how many pages are included, whether or not it uses write-ahead logs or journal files. So it'll give you an idea that this is probably a SQLite database that's past version 3.7.0. And then it'll also let you know if there are any free lists aligned to this page. So things that were deleted or marked for deletion, those would be over here. So that's our SQLite database view and what it would look like inside of BelkaSoft Evidence Center X and what records came from write-ahead logs and which ones were in the main database. All right. So I've kind of given you an idea of all the different types of artifacts that you can expect to see. Just know there is so much more to this, and I'd be more than happy to provide any sort of demonstrations in further detail or answer questions shortly after this. And the next thing I want to talk about is some bundles that you can expect to see coming out of this webinar, such as BelkaSoft X plus the decryption module with the passware and the T2 capabilities. So we'll look at 10% off for new customers, and I believe that passware is also doing some sort of discount bundle for pre-existing customers of BelkaSoft, but I'll let them speak on that during our Q&A. All right, and that is what I have for you today. Again, as I mentioned, there's so many different unique and artifacts that BelkaSoft supports for, Macs, iPhones, and so on. And obviously, we can't cover all of those here during this webinar. So again, if you're interested in that demonstration, please let me know. But with that being said, I think it's time to go ahead and move into Q&A, and then again. Yuri, the CEO and founder of BelkaSoft, and Dimitri, the founder of Passware, are here to answer any specific questions that you may have as well, along with Tony and myself. All right, thanks so much for joining us today.